Good day, everyone. My name is Dan Schreiber, and I will be talking to you about dress code and dress code policy in public education. A brief history of dress in schools. In the 1950s, many school dress codes prohibited girls from wearing slacks or pants. Boys wore jeans or slacks with collared shirts or white t-shirts. The dictum, dress right, act right, was heard often in schools in the 1950s. Famous movies and books that reflect the 1950s style of clothing were Grease, The Outsiders, and Happy Days. In the 1960s, school administrators stipulated the length of girls' skirts. Blue jeans, motorcycle boots, and black leather jackets were considered dangerous attire on boys and linked to gangs. In the 1970s, big collared shirts and bell-bottom pants. Tie-dye spilled over from the 1960s. The comic here is a reflection of Saturday Night Fever with John Travolta. And yes, the 1980s. In the 1980s, an effort to thwart growing gang activity, school officials began to re-examine their school dress codes and consider policies requiring uniforms. School dress codes began to surface in this decade due to the growing gang problems and their association by color and style. The real unfortunate outcome of the 1980s was sagging pants, and it can still be seen today. The first public school known to have adopted uniforms was Cherry Hill Elementary in Baltimore, Maryland in 1987. In 1994, Long Beach Unified School District was the first school district to adopt a district-wide dress code policy. The idea of dress codes, and uniforms gained official sanction when President Clinton endorsed the idea of public school uniforms in his 1996 State of the Union address. U.S. Department of Education mailed a manual of school uniforms to all 16,000 school districts in the United States. And I think we can all remember this caption coming out of those times, and some of these are still around to this day, of what to wear and what not to wear when you show up to school. By 2000, 30% of the public schools in San Francisco, 50% of the schools in Cincinnati, 65% of the schools in Boston, 85% in Cleveland, and 95% in New Orleans had a school uniform programs. Also by 2000, 37 state legislatures, including those in California, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Louisiana, Maryland, New York, Tennessee, Utah, and Virginia, had enacted legislation empowering local districts to set their own uniform policies. Legal issues surrounding public school uniform policies are: school uniform policies infringe upon students' First Amendment right to freedom of expression. Also, claims under the 14th Amendment that the school has violated the student's liberty to control his or her personal appearance. It also interferes with a student's natural tendency to experiment with their identities. And they are tools of administrative power and control. Also, they offer a piecemeal approach to issues of racial and economic injustice, and they may discriminate against students from minority backgrounds. Pros for school uniforms: they create an enhanced climate for learning, boost school unity and pride, encourage individual self-expression, increase school safety and security. School uniforms are cost-effective. Cons for school uniforms: inhibit a student's individuality, inhibits a student's freedom of choice. Cost: Many parents shop at used and discount stores. Inconsistent enforcement, which I think this is seen many times in classrooms when teachers do not discipline in one classroom the same way they do in another that someone else does for the same infraction. Lawsuits pertaining to public school uniform policies. The ACLU in 2004 filed suit against Gwinnett County School District. The lawsuit claims that a student was suspended for wearing gang-related attire. Its claim is that it is a violation of free speech. Cheyenne Tribe in 2009 filed a lawsuit arguing that schools requiring dress code policies need to consult with tribes and parents of American Indian children in developing programs and policies. Tinker v. Des Moines Independent School District in 1969, this was a landmark case where the court clearly proclaimed that students do not shed their constitutional right to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. Canady v. Boiser Parish School Board in 1997, Judge Robert Parker acknowledged that students have a constitutional right to free expression under the First and 14th Amendments, and a person's choice of clothing can be constitutionally protected form of expression. However, Judge Parker also explained that the right to free speech is not absolute. Courts have concluded in many cases that sometimes school boards' regulation of student behavior outweighs individual students' right to free speech. There was a four-step test applied to determine the constitutionality in the Canady case. Under that test, a uniform policy passes constitutional muster if 1. The school board has the power to make such a policy. 2. The policy promotes a substantial interest of the board. 3. The board does not adopt the policy to censor student expression. 4. The policy's incidental restrictions on student expression are not greater than necessary to promote the board's interest. Schools that want to implement dress code policies should follow several steps. The first step is to define what is appropriate. The second step is to communicate with the parents and the staff of what the dress policy is going to be and collect information and input from them. 3. Educate everyone to the benefits that come with a dress code policy. Implement the program. And lastly, compliance and consistency need to take place and everyone be held responsible. This is just a diagram of the progression from definition, communication, education, implementation, and compliance. Be specific and do not allow for gray area or interpretations. Many educators and researchers point out that though there may be declines in school violence and improvement in academic performance, it is difficult to attribute such results to dress code or uniform policy. This is due in part because no long-term studies have been conducted to assess the effectiveness of school uniforms or specific dress codes. The results remain unproven. But until we have conclusive research on whether or not dress code policies do in fact improve education, we can only keep throwing penalty flags at the situation and hope for the best. I think this caption captures the essence of dress code policy. Public school dress policy is supported by ISLLC standards 3, 5, and 6.